The giant Dogman chased my girlfriend. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This story happened back in the early 1980s. None of us had heard about an upright walking dogman in those times, but we sure had heard of the original four-legged kind. This was the variety or subspecies of dogman depicted in the Gable film hoax. It was called a dogman because it was a dog that was the size of a man. It didn't have hands. It had really, really big paws. I don't know what happened to this kind of creature, but around the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, people stopped reporting so many sightings of them, at least not as many as earlier. In the modern era, as you know, people are claiming to be seeing the upright walking werewolf-type creatures more than any of the other variations. This is a story about my girlfriend who disappeared over 25 years ago this autumn. I'm not sure if the events I'm about to relate to you have anything to do with her disappearance or not, but this is what happened when we all still knew her. I'm going to call her Carly because it's the first name that popped into my head. I'm not going to use any real names in any of this because the story gets pretty crazy at points, and nobody needs these bad memories brought up again. This was my last serious girlfriend, even though the authorities never accused me of being involved in Carly's vanishing. Women weren't as comfortable around me after that. I could see it in their eyes, and I would react in a guilty fashion, which would make them even more uncomfortable. I felt guilty because I was still loyal to Carly, but they seemed to think I was acting guilty because I was the one who took Carly's life from her. I mean, I strongly suspect that I know who took her away from us. It's just that when I try to tell most normies about what I think happened, they look at me as though I had 4 eyeballs on my face. I know how people react to the following story. So this is why I'm keeping it all anonymous. Or it's a big part of why, anyhow. So this was one of those Wisconsin werewolf stories of the first half of the 1980s that somehow never got picked up by Linda Godfrey or anyone else for that matter. It just sort of fell through the cracks, and for that, I suppose I'm grateful. This would all be much harder to bear the weight of if the story were famous and I were recognized by strangers. At least every person walking past doesn't know that my life was marred by the North American upright walking canid. Carly and I had fallen in love over the summer that year. As it was moving on into the fall, we were talking about the logistics of continuing to see each other during the winter. In the summer, she would often walk over to my place alone, and sometimes return home the same way. Her return home had started to become uncomfortable for her, though, as she felt she was hearing someone in the bushes and behind the trees who was following after her wherever she went. Even when she'd make a different turn than usual, she could hear whoever it was, always somewhere, just out of sight. Sometimes she would see the shadow of its dark silhouette briefly, as it darted from one hiding spot to another. So she knew it was not a figment of her imagination, or an audio illusion, or hallucination. Of course, I started walking her home after I heard about that. I have to say, it's a journey that's as lovely during the day as it is creepy at night. When I walked Carly home the first time, neither of us heard anyone or anything following us at all. This was the same result for the next few times I walked her home, until we started to become comfortable and feel as though we were safe traveling through those woods in the dark of night. We started acting silly. We started making more noise. We started paying less attention to our surroundings, and we let our guard down. Then one night, at about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the walk, we both saw the dogman dart out in front of us, racing just inches away from our faces. I'm 6 feet tall, and the creature's fur blocked my field of vision, as it raced past, so that means it had to have been taller than 6 feet at the shoulder. To be clear, it was over 6 feet, went down on all fours. I have no idea what size it might have been standing up on its hind legs, as I'm lucky that I never saw it do anything like that. So what we saw was a bit of a blur, in that it was moving fast, but it was also clear that it could go much faster, if and when it wanted to. This creature was bigger than a pony, around the size of a horse, but neither of us ever suggested that that was what it was. This was clearly something canine. It was not ursine, it was not feline. It was something from the wolf or coyote or dog family. If there were a giant marsupial breed that externally resembled a canine, then this might have been that. But try to visualize a dog that is so large that you think you're seeing Hollywood special effects, or you wonder if your brain has started to malfunction. The only feature that to me did not look canine was the way its fur sort of seemed to stand up along the top ridge of its back. It reminded me of a mohawk hairstyle, sort of, but possibly it was a sign that the animal was spooked in some way. When a cat gets scared or angry, its back fur stands on end, and its tail fluffs out like a raccoon. That's when an animal is at its most dangerous, when its fur is standing on end. Since I only glimpsed the beast briefly as it ran in front of us, I had more questions than answers. The speed at which it ran, and the way it forced us to stop or else walk into it, made it clear that this was intended as a bullying gesture. Were we being told not to walk any further? For a moment I was about as scared as I've ever been in my life. Maybe a better word might be intimidated. I had that old Carl Perkins song Matchbox going through my head. Then I suddenly realized the lyrics. Let me be your little dog till your big dog come. That's how it goes. I tried to remember the next line, and then it came to me. When your big dog get here, watch how your puppy dog run. Well, that wasn't very inspiring. I was ready to turn tail and run, like the song said. But when I turned to say just that to Carly, I saw her glaring out into the woods. I'm so sick of you keeping me afraid, she shouted into the night. We aren't going to take it from you any longer, she said, grabbing me by the hand. I had no choice but to pretend I agreed with her, but my sweaty palm might have given me away. Nevertheless, when Carly marched on toward her home, I marched shoulder to shoulder with her, trying my best to look unafraid. Onward we marched stiffly into the night. I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I wanted to be any place but where we were. Carly seemed much more together about it than I was, but this had been building up much longer for her. Maybe she already knew it was a Dogman before that night. For me, I was going through a few different mental crises all at once. I had to first accept that the Dogman was a real thing, and not just a regional legend. And then I had to accept that one of them was bullying us and acting possessive over my human girlfriend. Then after all that, I had to not faint from how dangerous the situation was that the two of us found ourselves in. Maybe if I had found out a week or two earlier that this was in fact the Dogman, then I might not have been so close to a state of shock in that moment. Then again, if I had known it was a Dogman, there is no way I would have ever made that trip on foot. When we rounded the corner and could finally see Carly's house in the distance, we both literally let out a sigh of relief. We had made it, all the way there, and the Dogman hadn't shown his ugly face again. We let go of each other's hands, and I think we even chuckled a bit, relaxing, for the first time. Well, the beast was on me before I knew what was happening. Carly saw it before I heard it. That's how silent its movements were, when it was being stealthy. I was shoved to the ground by the beast man, and I somehow accidentally brought Carly down with me. It was unintentional, but it kept her out of his reach. The Dogman turned and issued this bellow that was somewhere between a bark and a roar. In that moment, his jaws opened so wide, displaying all his teeth. I later called it a saber-toothed thylacine. It was not tan-colored, but it did have stripes. Again, it's not impossible that we're dealing with evolution parallel to canine evolution. The thylacine, after all, looked just like a dog, but it was a marsupial. It had more in common with a kangaroo than with a coyote. Maybe this Dogman species we saw was a species of creature that looked canine externally, but was either marsupial or even some other kind of being that I, as a layman, would know nothing about. The head was so large relative to the body, and the way the hair stood up on the ridge of its spine, I was thinking of a wild boar I saw once. It was big, but not nearly as big as this pony-sized Dogman. It also had the look of a mohawk up on its back, and it also had teeth too large to even fit inside its snout. I mean, what if the Dogman is a kind of a hog that evolved in a parallel way to wolves? I'm just wild guessing, and clearly I'm no scientist, so please mostly take what I'm saying in a poetic way. It resembled a canine in most ways, but had that porcine back ridge and that thylacine way of being able to open its jaws fantastically wide compared to an average canine. I didn't really register too much of this consciously in the moment, but I've had a very long time to think about it ever since. So the beast shouted at us and stared at us. We stared back for a while. He snorted in apparent disgust. Then he turned his gigantic old prehistoric head and trotted off. We could see the big monster briefly from behind, and in fact, it did have a tail like a raccoon. Did the tail always look like that? Or was this creature in a state of extreme agitation? The four-legged Dogman had run up and deliberately bumped me to the ground with its left shoulder, which was up around the height of my face. If it were a feline, I would wonder if this might have been meant as a playful gesture, but nothing about it seemed to invite play. It felt more like a threat to me. Like, look out, bud, I can do lots worse than this, you know? At any rate, Carly had no brave speeches at that point in the evening. We both pulled each other up and ran as fast as we could until we were inside her parents' home, and we both collapsed in exhaustion. The most unnerving thing about the entire experience was the way the creature made no sound as it emerged from the underbrush to charge us. That kind of implies that when Carly had first been hearing something in those woods following her, that creature wanted her to hear him. He could have tracked her silently, but he wanted her to be afraid of him. I called a cab to take me home that night. So, Carly and I were a bit afraid to go over each other's places after that. Either she'd need a lift or I would, as neither of us were interested in taking that walk anymore. Neither of us had the kind of parents who had very much patience for talk of monsters and ghosts and ghoulies, so nobody was too happy when we suddenly started begging rides to each other's houses. The two of us tried to spend more time together on the phone, but this was the 80s. There was one phone per house, and you were not encouraged to have long conversations when important calls might be coming in for other people. So, to be honest, she and I had begun to drift apart just a little when I called her house one night, and her mother was surprised that Carly wasn't with me. It took us until the next morning, really, before it sunk in that she had gone missing. Her parents refused to file a missing persons report for over a year, insisting that she had left them a note. They have never allowed Carly's alleged note to be seen publicly, as they insist that the contents are too personal to the family. Nevertheless, Carly had 2 credit cards and a wallet she carried with her at all times. None of them were seen or used again. If she ran away, then she ran off the grid, living anonymously off of cash. I'm not saying it's impossible and it would have been easier back then, but it didn't seem like something she was about to do during the time just before her disappearance. Then again, we weren't able to see each other as often during that time due to the danger of the Dogman being between our homes. My entire life has been haunted by this experience and this loss. I walked that path between the 2 houses a dozen times or more. Sometimes I would go alone, other times with buddies, and I never saw or heard the Dogman ever again. Of course, we know it only makes noise when it wants to, so it might have been there, every single time, staring out at me and my friends, and laughing at how ineffectual humans are against it. I still have dreams about being back in those days. I wish I had listened to Carly right from the start. I wish I had understood how bad a problem this was, and I wish I had taken precautions. Maybe this could have been prevented if we had approached the deep horror of the situation more honestly. Instead, we deluded ourselves that we were living ordinary, boring suburban lives. And while we were complacent and trusting, like farm animals, the Dogman maneuvered himself into place, and he scored the game that he was looking to hunt. He was the apex predator, and we were the carrot-eating herbivores placed on this planet to feed him. That's what my main takeaway was when the giant Dogman chased my girlfriend. Don't not go nowhere. Biggie's got one more allegedly true Dogman story, and it starts right now. The supermarket werewolf in my backyard. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This happened a few years back. I don't remember exactly when, but a little before the pandemic, I guess. Somewhere between 2014 and 2019, that should narrow it down. Since my wife passed on and I lived alone in that house, all the years blended together into one big lukewarm bowl of mud. When the pandemic started, my son and daughter helped me move into a smaller place in town, so that's how I know this happened before then. The house was giant. We had raised 4 kids to adulthood there, and now it had become too much for one old man to handle. As it got run down, it started to look like a haunted mansion, and I started to behave like a bitter old eccentric. And then one day, I looked out of the window, and I saw that my haunted mansion now had its own Dogman or werewolf. At that point, I even started calling myself Grandpa Munster to make fun of how weird my life had gotten. Honestly, seeing the Dogman that first time made me convinced that I had lost my marbles. It wasn't the idea of seeing a Dogman per se that seemed so off the wall to me. It was the fact that this was the same Dogman they had on sale as a yard statue for Halloween at my local drugstore. At this point, when I tell this anecdote in person, some people roll their eyes and say, "Oh, someone stuck the drugstore werewolf in your backyard, mystery solved." But the animatronic werewolf only wiggled around a little and growled. I saw something on my window that looked exactly like that, only it had come alive, and it was walking through the trees toward the back of my property. And when I looked at it, the beast seemed to sense me, and it turned to look right back. No drugstore Halloween display can do that. So first, I guess I should explain what I had seen in the store. I have searched the internet and have not found exactly what I saw in the drugstore on that day, so the model must have been discontinued. There are a number of similar ones, though, and I have sent you a link to a page with a 360-degree view of one of these animated store display werewolves. Again, this is not exactly the one I saw in that store, but it was something along these lines. It was not 9.5 feet tall, though. It was more like 6 feet. And I do remember the ripped-up lumberjack shirt and jeans, as though this were a grunge werewolf from the 90s. I remember that they had it set to randomly go roar and to lunge forward at you if you stood in front of it. I liked it so much, I even thought about buying one for myself. But in my neighborhood, a Halloween display like that would either get vandalized or stolen. Or maybe it would get vandalized and stolen. In either case, I didn't buy one. So imagine my surprise to see on out the back window of my house, traipsing through the area that used to be my wife's garden, that Dogman, the one from the store. He didn't even have the decency to wear his torn-up grunge outfit. In this appearance, he showed up au natural. Not that I could see anything but fur. He looked like an animal, but an animal that stood up. I mean, nothing about him seemed human other than his posture. But he was not an escaped chimpanzee, since his head was a canine one. No, I don't mean a baboon face, I mean a dog face, with dog eyes, and a dog nose, and a long drooling dog tongue, and upright pointing dog ears. It wasn't a Bigfoot. It was a dog that stood upright, and walked with a stride very similar to that of a human being. It looked so exactly like the Wolfman animated statue in that store that I wish I could show you the exact thing I'm talking about. Yes, it stood like a man, and looked very humanoid when doing so, but I do think it was a canine animal of some sort. I don't think it was a werewolf. I think it was a unique kind of wolf or dog. But the fact that I saw it after seeing something just like it in the drugstore adds this very spooky layer to it for me personally that makes it feel supernatural or woo-woo. It's the 1-2 punch of the statue in the store and the sighting of a real upright walking animal that makes this feel significant to me inside. But my more rational side insists that the two incidents are most likely unrelated. Still, in my interior emotional life, they are not only related, they are two events in the same story. Of course the creature I saw had something to do with its animatronic brother in the drugstore, shouts my emotional side, while my skeptical side rolls its eyes and makes sarcastic comments under its metaphorical breath. Still, there must be some reason they discontinued the werewolf store display model that I saw. I think it was because it looked too much like the real thing. In fact, it looked just like the supermarket werewolf in my backyard. When we're talking about the Mr. Ron, it's never off and always on. He's got a very positive attitude. I'm talking about Ron Barracuda. Please join us in thanking Ron Barracuda for making this episode possible. Ron is one of our $7 channel members, which means he gets more perks than our $3 members, but not quite as many perks as our $10 members. And here to lay out who gets what in return for which is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.